Hey, Claire-Lise, welcome to the Your Sorority Journey podcast.
Hi.
Thanks so much. We are so excited to have you on for Recruitment Takeover, having to gotten to know you over the TikTok world. I know that you are like the perfect fit to have as a guest talking about all things recruitment.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be on the podcast.
Um, so for people who have watched your TikToks or gotten to know you a little bit on that space, they probably have already heard a bit about what got you into talking about sorority life. Obviously, you're an active sorority member. But tell us a little bit about your recruitment experience and how that inspired you to start talking all things recruitment on your platform.
Okay, so when I was rushing as a PNM, I didn't realize how much I did not know going into the process. I was only a legacy for like one chapter that wasn't at my university. And so I didn't know anything, especially since I went to one of the more competitive schools for Rush. And so when I went in and I was cut by a couple houses, I took it super personally and I was devastated to say the least.
Yeah.
So it was not an easy week. I ended up finding my home though, and I wouldn't be happier anywhere else. And I'm so glad I got the sisters that I have. And now I'm on exec at my chapter. But rush week was super difficult. And it wasn't because I wasn't a good PNM. It was because
Yeah.
I didn't know that it's so not personal, like all the cuts and stuff. And so when I started to make my TikToks, I had COVID and I was really bored. And I was like, well, what can I do for fun? And so we had a recruitment workshop where they were asking us like trying so we had a recruitment workshop where they had us come up with like questions and stuff to ask PNMs. And
Yeah.
one girl mentioned that you can get like a post-it note and put it on your laptop and you don't have to memorize these questions.
Totally, for virtual recruitment. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that we could like come up with really unique, well thought out questions, and so we could like stand out during recruitment. And I was like, oh, that would kind of make a good TikTok idea. So I made a TikTok of it. It did really well, and I already had a couple followers at that point from doing just random videos.
Yeah.
And I noticed people responded really well to recruitment advice because they're probably in the same boat that I was my freshman
Yeah.
year and not knowing a lot about the process. And so I just kind of started doing advice for both actives and PNMs, and it kind of took off from there.
I love that. And I was definitely in your boat when I went through recruitment, probably a few years before you. I just felt like so blindsided. The chapter that I accepted a bid to was the best fit for me. And here I am, 6 years later, so thankful that I joined that chapter and I didn't even have any other distractions even, to take me away from joining the chapter I was meant to. But it felt like you said so personal in the process. You're like, wait, was I not good enough? Why was I not good enough for you? It's like not getting a second date or something, it's so personal. But I think it's so important to remember there's such a bigger plan and strategy behind the scenes that you just don't see as a potential new member. That's so hard to keep in mind when it feels like such a reflection of who you are as a person, not being good enough for these chapters.
Exactly. And like, I didn't realize as a new member or a potential new member
Yeah.
that the girl you talk to doesn't have all the power. Like
Right.
I would talk to a girl at a house and I'd be like, we got along so well, but then why did I get cut? I didn't realize that there's so much that goes into creating the lists of the PNMs you ask back each round. It's not just like
Mm.
one conversation with one girl. It's usually like a team of people, and that team has a goal, or that girl might be like, I really like you, but I definitely see you more at another house. And at
Right.
the end of the day, it's about like finding the best fit for the PNM and the chapter.
Right. That's not to say that she couldn't have been a great member of your chapter. She just might be a stellar member of another chapter and you want to help her
Exactly.
on that path. As a PNM, as you look back on that experience, do you remember any questions that a recruiter asked you that really stood out that made you think more intentionally about what you wanted from sorority, or gave you a, I don't know, a platform to really sell yourself that felt good?
One of my favorite questions I was asked was, what are you passionate about? Or what are you most
Mm,
passionate about? I think
yeah.
it's a good open-ended question because it gives the PNM an opportunity to think about something that really means a lot to them, but also showcase something that they put in a lot of effort into. So for me, I absolutely am so passionate about animals and I love volunteering at
Oh,
animal
cool.
shelters. And so during recruitment, even though that's not the philanthropy round, I was able to talk about my love for hands-on volunteering. And the sister that I was talking to at my eventual house talked about all of their hands-on work that they do with a local school for children with autism. And I was like, it really resonated with me how I could translate that energy into their philanthropy.
Yeah, that's so good. I think sometimes we think we need to like relate to like super surface level questions just to like help them like break through the nerves or like not get too overwhelmed by the process when really there's like so much there that they've experienced having like gone through high school or maybe having like a year or two at your university that you have to give them like a chance to showcase that will set you up to like sell the sorority as well. Um and it also like, look at that. You were able to find a connection point with the chapter you ended up joining. So now
Mhm.
you've recruited as in like in person and virtually, correct?
Yes, I have, and they are very different.
Yeah. So like thinking about going back to in person, I mean, the whole country is aware that like most of our recruiters like haven't even seen in-person recruitment if they went through as a PNM or recruited last year virtually. What do you think about like this new, I don't know, recruitment format with these varying experience levels?
I think it will make for a very interesting recruitment. There are
Yeah.
some areas that I'm nervous about. So for my university, we're doing a hybrid model where the
Okay.
first few rounds are online and then the last round or two are going to be in person. It hasn't been fully decided yet. But for the in-person aspect, it's going to be interesting because obviously you are having to teach two rounds of girls how to recruit in person, which
Yeah,
is definitely, I would say it's harder to recruit in person than on Zoom because you have a lot more variables going on. Like you
totally.
can read the girl's body language so much more in person, but you're also in a house that's super loud. And so you have to talk and really enunciate your language. And sometimes
Yeah.
it's awkward because you can't hear the PNM. Whereas over Zoom, you can have a little post-it note with your questions. You can be
Right,
taking
right, right,
notes.
right.
I would literally have girls' resumes pulled up while I'd be talking to them and I'd be like, okay, that makes sense with that, you know.
Oh
Whereas
my
in
gosh,
person, you have to
yeah.
like memorize everything and then go score the girl afterwards and like write all your
Right.
notes. And so it's going to be interesting teaching two groups of girls how to do that. But my hope for this is I think it'll be a much more genuine recruitment this year
Mm,
because over Zoom it was so much more conversation based. There was less room for all like the fluff of having pretty decorations and having
yeah.
a presentation and stuff. So you got more into deeper conversations. So my hope for new recruiters is that they really carry that energy of deep conversations into this round of in-person recruitment.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a really good point, right? Like virtual, while it was not ideal, gave us a really cool lens of a way that we can focus recruitment, right? Like, let's not keep it like via Zoom screens forever, but how can we carry elements of that into in person recruitment? I'm curious to hear like what you saw between your experience as a PNM, your experience recruiting in person, and your experience recruiting virtually to be like a common, strong topic of conversation, regardless of environment, regardless of role. Like, what was a topic, area, or maybe like question set that like really stands out to you as like this every time was like a strong area that we could talk about?
I think the topic of why a woman is going through recruitment usually tends to come up because I think it is so important and really indicative of who she's going to be as a chapter member. And it
Yeah.
also, as a recruiter, gives us a lot of insight into the PNM. Like if we're like, oh, why are you going through recruitment? And she's like, well,
Yeah.
my mom, my sister, and so we're all in the same sorority. You're like, okay, well, she's not one of our like, so she might want to go that other chapter.
Right.
Or if
Right.
she's like, I had a strong group of girls in high school and I'm really looking to recreate that in college. And I like the big sis like thing that we do. Um,
Yeah.
that's like, it gives us an opportunity to see that, she really is in it for like the friendships or if they're in it because, they want to be in their mom's sorority, just it gives us an opportunity to see that as a recruiter.
Yeah, I think intentions are so important regardless of year, right? It's also important for PNM to understand the intentions of the chapters and like what they can expect from membership from each and every chapter, right? I think some of those questions go both ways. And you're right, there's so much that we can learn from our members when we like kind of dig into like what sisterhood means to a PNM, like what that would like look like. Does it look like Friday through Sunday festivities, or does it really look like actually being there for your sisters and like being loyal and connected to this organization that you're joining? And I think a lot of those things like really came to light this past year when we couldn't do sisterhood, or we couldn't do like those typical like membership experiences as normal because of the pandemic. Um, I'm assuming like how are you preparing or like considering like how that topic of conversation is going to go this year?
I would say I'm pretty fortunate because even though last year was COVID, I got the closest to my sisters last year.
Man,
And it was for all of those little things. I think before COVID, I had relied a little bit too much on date events, being like, oh, I'll see my sisters there, or at this next sisterhood event, I'll see them. I don't have to go out of
yep.
my way to make extra plans. But with COVID, we had to make all of our own plans. And I kind of fell into like a new friend group in my sorority. And my littles took littles, and we all ended up planning a spring break trip together.
Yeah.
And it was so much fun getting to bond with people I wouldn't have necessarily sat next to before. And having to really be intentional with who I spent time with also really impacted my friendships with my sisters.
Totally. And I think that intentionality is really going to shape the way recruiters like you are able to answer the questions that potential new members have about membership during COVID, right? Like, what did it look like to be a member of your chapter? And I think we're like being naive as chapters if we think potential new members aren't going to ask about that, right? Like, if we're just going to think that we assume this like period of time just didn't happen, like just going back to life before COVID, because you recruited members. Like some of your members haven't even seen sorority life outside of COVID. So I'm curious, like, how would you encourage a potential member to even ask about that experience and like boldly kind of understand like what that looked like?
I would totally encourage them to ask questions about how we used this year to get closer to our sisters, because once we're graduated, there's not going to be any more date events or sisterhood events or bachelor watch parties. It's going to be all about that intentional connections and choosing to hang out with your sisters. And so I think because we got to practice that with COVID, it's going to show that we're going to be really close to our sisters even once we graduate. And so I feel like if a PNM can ask that kind of question, and if a sister can answer it in a way that kind of similar to how I would have answered it, that can really show how strong the sisterhood is. And it gives the PNM a sense of what kind of sisterhood that chapter has.
Totally. Especially because like maybe and hopefully like we'll never experience a hardship as universal as COVID again. It doesn't mean like hard things won't happen in your chapter or campus community or individual sisters' lives. Not to say like after you graduate, like how will you navigate those things without that structure? I think it really demonstrates like, is this an organization? Is this a sisterhood that can carry you through hard things, right? Like it did
Exactly.
the recruiter you're talking to.
Exactly. And I think online, especially, you hear, oh, sororities are just paying for friends. But I think COVID really showed that it's so much more than that, because everything you would typically pay for didn't get to happen. So it was all
Right.
about choosing to have time with your sisters and getting to hang out with them. And we all got closer than ever before.
Mm. Yeah. So how would you encourage our recruiters that are listening to like prepare to talk about those things? Like that intentionality, that like choice of showing up. Like how can they talk about that with the PNM?
Something that I find that really helps recruiters is to think of like 5 core memories that you had throughout the year, maybe some that happened during a COVID year and some that happened in a normal year, if you had the
Yeah.
luxury of having a normal year, and really like solidify those memories and have them at the forefront of your mind. That way, when a PNM asks, you can recall that and be like, oh yeah, spring break with my sisters was so much fun. Me and my sister so and so bonded so much, having late night talks by the pool or something.
Yeah.
And that way it can
Yeah.
help the PNM like envision what life would be like.
Yeah, I think the more like detailed you can be with those
Mhm.
stories is helps like draw that image, right? Of like what that experience looked like. And especially if you're able to like prepare that ahead of time of like these are the things that meant a lot to me instead of just trying to like think of things on the fly. Like back pocket things like
Mhm.
what's your major? Instead of like asking what your major is, like have a better follow-up with an experience or a story that's going to like meet that potential new member's need in your chapter.
Exactly. I also just think having certain questions kind of like in your back pocket in general really helps, especially like open-ended questions. Like instead of asking like, oh, what's your major? Be like, why did you pick that as your major and what do you want to do with that? So that
Yeah.
the PNM can talk a little bit more instead of just being like, yeah, I'm a biology major and then moving on.
Right, right. Definitely open-ended. And that like kind of is going to help us wrap up too. Like how can we move away from like some of those like really standard questions that you know that PNM is going to get at every round? Like what are some of your favorite like most creative questions that our PNMs or recruiters could ask to like really shake things up and make it like a little less monotonous for the hours that they are feeling like they're being interviewed one way or the other?
I think if you can really steer the conversation in a really specific direction, that kind of takes it away from the what's your major? What dorm are you living in? Like those kind of really basic questions.
Mhm.
Something that I was asked was like, what was the last concert I attended? Or what was my favorite
Oh,
concert? Because usually people like talking about music. And so then it's like, oh, yeah, I like that music. And then they can be like, oh, well, I went to this concert. And
yeah.
luckily I go to UT and it's in Austin and we have ACL. So usually girls love talking about ACL during recruitment. And so it just kind of provides an opportunity to talk about something a little bit different. And as a recruiter, it's also nice because if a girl loves Taylor Swift and you can recommend a sister who also is equally obsessed with Taylor Swift, and
Yeah.
you can add a little note, be like, hey, casually bring up Taylor Swift, and then they can like really bond.
Absolutely. Yeah. I remember one of my favorite questions to ask when I was a recruiter was like, tell me about your best friend or like
Mm-hmm.
something that's like your favorite place to visit when you go home if you aren't like living in your hometown. Because typically people can like go off about their best friend or that ice cream shop or whatever, some like restaurant in their hometown that like means the world to them. And like both of you leave with like such a vivid memory of that conversation that you don't forget when you have 45 other conversations the length of that weekend.
Exactly. And like something else I would say for recruiters is to be intentional with your questions in the sense that like figure out what you're trying to get out of the PNM because there
Yep.
were definitely unique questions that I was asked at other houses. Like someone asked me like what my favorite reality TV show was. And it was fun to talk about, but I didn't get to
Yeah.
express my values. And as a PNM, we don't know what values this like the chapters are recruiting off of. And so
Right.
I felt like I was like, oh no, I didn't get to talk about like my service or anything like that. And then I
Yeah.
was released the next day from that chapter and I was like, oh, maybe if I had been asked a question where I could have weaved it into conversation, I wouldn't have been cut or something, you know? And
Oh,
so
Claire-Lise. Yeah, that's such a good combo, right? Like we don't want to just entertain the PNMs or we just don't want to like woo the recruiters. Like we want there to be like intentionality behind
mhm,
the like depth of conversation we're having. Cause if we can go off about, I don't know, like the Bachelorette, like great, but what's the value? Or like what's the membership
exactly.
potential that either the chapter or the PNM has to offer as a product of the passion for the Bachelorette or ice cream?
Which is interesting because like I also was asked about like I mentioned oh I like the Bachelorette at the house that I was at or I ended up going and they're like well we do
Yeah.
Bachelorette watch parties every Monday and the recruiter was able
Perfect.
to like steer it back to sisterhood and show that
Mm,
like oh you like this TV show well a lot of us like it too and we use it as an example of like how we can bond further and we do it right after chapter every Monday and I was
yeah.
like oh I could really like envision that and like so I love to talk during reality TV and so I was like oh these are my kind of people if we all like to sit and watch it together.
Yeah, absolutely. Or, I mean, even like the best friend question, like getting to see like how
Mhm.
they connect with other people or like their hometown, like loyalty to something greater than themselves,
Exactly.
right?
I love the like best friend question because then it also kind of shows like what kind of sisterhood are they looking for? Like what do
Yeah.
they value in like a best friendship?
Yeah. And I think for any PNMs that are listening, like don't be intimidated by recruiters asking about your other relationships. Like it's not their goal that all of your friendships ever come from that sisterhood. Like we want your like experience on campus to be like so much fuller because of sorority and like that bond and relationship to be like super deep. But it doesn't mean that you can't be friends with your friends from hometown or especially not Panhellenic sisters. Like we want you to like have those bonds of sisterhood outside the chapter that you join. You're joining a community. So don't be like thrown off by that, but know that it actually demonstrates a lot about your membership potential.
Exactly. And especially as a recruiter, we love it when PNMs express interest in joining other orgs that aren't just Greek life. Like I
Yeah.
was in Texas Wake Club my sophomore year, which is
Oh
like
gosh.
really fun and random. I was like, I'm just going
Yeah.
to join this. And I got
Yeah.
to meet some people that way. And so like especially my chapter, we really encourage that our members do something else. A lot of our members do something called Bond, which is like fundraising for our local children's hospital in like a really fun way. And so I think when girls do things outside of a sorority, it gives you more things to talk about during recruitment too.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially like things you did in high school, like things you did over the summer that you were involved in, or if you're going through recruitment as an upperclassman, like ways that you found your community at that university will definitely help. All right, Claire-Lise, any other like tips, tricks, or wisdom you want to leave our listeners with today?
Let me think about that. Okay, so the best piece of advice that I got before recruitment was that if you're joining a sorority, there's like usually like 100 to 200, sometimes even 300 girls in this chapter. You're not going to get along with every single person, but you're
Mm.
bound to find a good group of girls that you really get along with, and probably any chapter that you join. So on bid day, be as open minded as possible. And it's good to remember that the girls recruiting you know their chapter better than you do. And so they know if you'd be a good fit. So if you're being asked back to a house on pref round, that means that they want you and they really could see you in their chapter. So even if you don't necessarily see it yet, give that chapter a chance.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it is so important to give chapters a chance, regardless of what you've heard prior, the different sources that you have Googled or talked to before you show up in that chapter's experience. Like going in with an open mind is so unbelievably important. And I remember being told that you want to be somewhere where you're wanted, right? Like, so yeah, like grieve or like process your emotions when you find out you weren't invited back to the chapter you're most excited about. If that's what happens, like totally like allow that to be. Same thing with recruiters. If your ideal PNM isn't coming back, like you can process that, but then let it go and like look at the other options available to you, the other women that want to join your chapter, the women who want you to join their chapter, right? There's so much beauty and opportunity there that getting hung up on that one PNM or that one chapter longer than, I don't know, before rounds start, like is unnecessary because there's so much more for you out there.
Exactly.
So
I couldn't agree more.
amazing. I'm so glad we got to do this. Like having like considered you like a TikTok sister friend of mine for some time now. Like it's so good to bridge that gap and like actually meet you. And I can't wait for our PNMs and recruiters going through recruitment this fall to hear your amazing insight.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I really had a good time.
Good. Me too. Bum, bum, bum.